But in that reality of lifting and giving in my life, then I have this whole section of 12, 13, 14, 15. And for time's sake, it's this. I'm supposed to love everyone. That's what 14, 15, and 13, 14, 15 are. I'm supposed to love the people in my government and respect my government. Doesn't mean that we do everything they ever said. We talked about that. The bottom line is when there's a moral issue, a biblical moral issue, we're not called to rebel, we're called to disobey. And it's a big difference, right? Because we're not called to stick it to the man or do any of those things. We're called to disobey in a moral instance where we say, you know what? No, we're going to keep teaching from the Bible. You know what? We're not going to stop meeting. We might do it in secret, but we're not going to listen to you if you tell us to stop meeting for moral reasons. We're not going to do those things, right? Then he talks about how to love people in the church, how to love people outside the church, how to love employers, right? All those things. How to do that, and how our calling is to lay down our own personal rights. In fact, he says that when he starts 15. He says that we who are strong, meaning people that are of strong conviction and walking in their faith, he says we who are strong have an obligation. In other words, a debt. We owe the other people around us to love them and to watch over them. So it's something that when we got saved, it's the one debt we incurred. And that's actually what he said, remember in Romans 13:6, where he says, owe no man anything. And the context there is as far as like sinning. Don't sin against people. Don't cause yourself to owe them something. He's not talking about credit card debt, although that could be unwise. He's talking about don't sin in ways that somebody could say, you owe me morally. He says, owe no man anything except the debt that's from God to love that person, right? So then in chapter 16, he does this really awesome thing. We already talked about it, all the relationships, all the great greetings that he gives and all these things. So what you have is when Paul says, and we come back to where our text is, he says that I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have been taught. Avoid them. He's talking about that. He's talking about the letter he just wrote. So there's different context for this too, because you can have like just full-blown false teachers, right? People that want to come in and they want to say, no, you have to obey the law. You have to be circumcised. You have to keep the dietary law. You need to meet on Saturday because it's the Sabbath, or keep the Sabbath, however you'd like to label that. You have to do those things to be saved. That started way back about day 2, right, in the early church. Pretty much 3,000 people got saved, and then a bunch of people said, and we need to keep the law. That's literally how it went. That's not a new teaching. And so from day 2 on, the apostles, and specifically Paul, have been writing epistles to show, no, we don't keep the law. We don't do those things. But there were teachers called Judaizers that would follow Paul around to churches he had started and other believers, and they would say, hey, Jesus was a good start for you. That was cool that you received Jesus. He's definitely the Messiah, but it's not enough. You actually also need to do these other things. So they were full-blown teachers. And then you have other teachers that came along, whether it be Joseph Smith or, fill in the blank, people that came along and said, no, the Bible's not entirely, you need more than that. And here's a whole nother book that you have, or my suggestions, or my notes on it, or whatever it might be that you need to be able to walk with Jesus. And that's in the context of just a full-blown false teacher. And we'll look at some other passages where sometimes it's just, well, in this passage also, it's just their lust. They do it for lust, whether that's power, whether it's recognition, whether it's money, right? All sorts of reasons that someone might be a false teacher. The dominance, having a cult to follow after you, whatever it might be, because people are broken and they do weird things like that, right? You can also just have someone in your body, in your church that is, maybe they're not a false teacher, but there's something about it. They just love causing problems. They're just not happy unless they're causing a problem. And there's some labels for this, right? He says people that raise up divisions, they cause divisions, and they create obstacles. So this is something it's kind of not super fun to talk about. It's not the cool thing of all the relationships and the excitement of walking with Jesus and seeing the fruit come out of our lives. And it's not even something that's really, really fun to deal with, to talk about, to interact with, isn't it? It's conflict. But yet Paul calls all believers. He doesn't say elders. He doesn't say deacons. He doesn't say women. He doesn't say men. He says brothers, which is the Greek word for brothers and sisters. And he proactively says to be watching out for this. And then, I don't know if you ever sat through like safety briefings in any job ever. I fixed cars for 16 years, and at the more established shops, you have safety briefings and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, everyone I've ever been to, the company line is this: safety is everyone's job. You guys familiar with that? Safety is everyone's job. Hey, looking out for dissension is everyone's job. Because these people, this is what it says they do. They cause divisions. So they come in, whether it's a person who's a false teacher, a person who wants to bring people to themselves, whatever it might be, and they just cause divisions. And it could be anything. It could be somebody that it's one thing to say, I have a problem with wearing masks, right? We don't have that anymore, but that was kind of a hot topic. It's one thing to say, I have a problem with wearing a mask. I don't think it's valid. That's fine, right? It's another thing to come into church and go, what are you doing wearing a mask? You sheep. You government-fearing sheep. You're not hardcore for Christ. You think Jesus would wear a mask? You're like, I don't know. I didn't ask him. I mean, but that's a whole other thing, isn't it? To mock someone for wearing a mask, to judge them, to make a mental judgment and to say you're weak, or you have this, or you have that. Especially when every person on the planet can point to 14 experts that tell them what they want to know, right? Isn't that how health works? I mean, there's no end to it. There's no end of articles and research papers and statistics. There's just no end of it. So one is just stating a thing like, hey, I don't really want to wear a mask. I think it's a farce. I'm not going to wear one. The other is coming full blown and saying, you're an idiot if you do. So one is causing a division and one is not. If you were to come into a church where they said, hey, we're all going to wear masks, and you said, well, forget you, I don't care, I'm not doing it, now you've moved into division, right? Because you've decided that your right or your understanding of what masks are worth or not worth, it supersedes loving and caring about other people. It's really tricky stuff that can go on. It's hard to work through, admittedly. So you can also have the doctrine side of things. The reason that safety is everyone's job is because we've had different people come in here over the years. We've had people come in that they're King James only folks. And here's the thing. I'm not going to measure these people's hearts. I don't want to say that out loud. Because if you truly believe in earnest that the King James Bible is the most accurate translation and that all other Bibles are influenced by Satan, you would probably be interested in trying to help people find truth, wouldn't you? But when you sit down with them and you say, okay, well, let's look at how the 72 or 70 scholars that translated the 1611 version and then the updated versions, and let's look at that and let's consider it. Now let's look at how the NIV was translated. Let's look at how the ESV, and you actually start to dig into those things. What you realize is that the King James only argument is paltry. It's weak and it's ignorant. And I'm not trying to mock people that do it. I'm just saying that it's a knee-jerk reaction based on a misappropriation of some verses in 1 Corinthians and a misunderstanding of how translating the Bible works. We don't hate people for that, right? I mean, but if someone comes in the church and they say, you know what, I read the King James because I feel like it's what I'm supposed to do. Hey, hands off, cool. We're not going to mess with you because we don't want to violate your conscience. But as soon as that person moves forward and says, so what does your pastor teach out of? What translation do your elders use? What do you use? Ooh, the NIV, huh? The nearly inspired version. Ooh, I don't know. Wow, right? I don't really think that. I actually am a fan of the NIV. Blomberg, the guy who did some speaking here, he's part of the translating team of the NIV, does the updates and so forth. But all that to say is that that's what happens, right? And as soon as we move into that, now we're causing a division. And not only are we causing a division, but we're actually raising up, we're creating an obstacle. Because here's a person, like we'll take the NIV for example, it falls into a lot of criticism. Every criticism I've ever read, I've tried to turn to the verses and read it and never had a beef with it. I guess some people have. I heard a rumor, I never found it or not. There's like a neutral pronoun one. It didn't have to do with transitioning or anything like that. It had more to do with including women, as I understand it. I've never seen one of those. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I don't know. But am I going to use a version that changes words to accommodate people? Probably not. Am I going to be upset that someone uses a version of the Bible because they feel like it includes women? I'm not. I'm not going to get upset about that. But so when we just have to be careful that when we're working through those things, like with the NIV, that we just say, hey, that's not the one for me, or it is, or whatever it might be. But we don't come in and then start making problems about it.